With a cast that reads like a who's who of action stars over the past 3 decades, The Expendables promises to be one of this summer's strongest blockbusters. The movie stars and is directed by Sylvester Stallone, who leads a group of mercenaries into South America. Among the gigantic ensemble cast is Sly's Rocky IV co-star Dolph Lundgren, who was in Toronto recently discussing the movie, and his character Gunnar Jensen.
First of all, Dolph, obviously the cast is a huge part of this movie. This is kind of like the Miami Heat of summer blockbusters. When this came across, presented to you, was this the kind of project that you were just instantly wanted to partake in, even before getting through the script?
Yes, it was. Well, I read the script first because I was asked quite early. I think Statham had been hired and maybe Jet Li, and Stallone just called me one day and just said, well, you know, because we were friends from way back, and he just said, I got the script. Hey, Dolph, check it out, see what you think. You like this guy, Gunnar? And I was like, yeah, I like the script. After a page and a half, I kind of knew that it was something I wanted to do.
Now, Stallone obviously is the lead in this movie and also directing, something that you have experience with, starring and directing. When you have that dual role, is it something that it's gratifying to have that control, or is it something that it's very hectic wearing both hats during a movie like that?
Well, it's a combination. It's a masochistic type of venture where you sort of, yeah, you like the control. It's great not to have anybody else mess with the movie, but on the other hand, you don't get much sleep, and you're, you know, the hardest thing is when you switch from being behind the camera, which is not so bad, to getting in front of it. And suddenly it's like, you're like, oh, I'm in the scene now? Damn, okay. What's it about? What's my character? Because as a director, you know, you're thinking a lot, and as an actor, you're trying to just react. So, yeah, it's more gratifying, I think, on the whole, though.
Tell us a little bit about Gunnar Jensen and what it was about this character that kind of jumped out of the page for you.
Well, Gunnar Jensen was an interesting guy on the page and hopefully off the page. He's like a crazy guy who's seen too much battle, and he's got a bit of combat syndrome, and he's, I think he drinks a little too much, perhaps. I mean, we don't see much of that, but we realize he's a bit off the cuff. And it was fun playing a bad guy who's kind of good, or a good guy who's kind of bad. And I get to do both. I get to be part of the good guy gang and also part of the bad guy gang in this film. And I don't want to give anything away, but then there's a switch towards the end that kind of throws the audience a little bit, I hope, and makes for kind of an interesting arc for the character.
The Expendables features 2 names synonymous with the fight world in former UFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champion Randy Couture, along with WWE Hall of Famer Steve Austin. But Lundgren himself has a strong background in the world of karate.
Yeah, I have a 3rd-degree black belt. I train pretty much every day. I'm trying to get my 4th next year if I'm lucky, and so I stay close to martial arts, yeah, and it was really a pleasure to be able to use some of it in this film, a little bit, fighting with Jet Li, who's also a martial artist. Obviously, Randy Couture is very good, a great fighter, and Stone Cold is a badass guy too, in his own right.
I'm curious, in a lifetime ago, had the UFC been an option for you, would that have been something you pursued? Because I know you actually did have a boxing fight once upon a time with Oleg Taktarov, who also was a former UFC fighter.
Well, I fought full contact when I was a kid, you know, in karate, Kyokushin karate, and I was asked a couple of years back to do an exhibition fight in Moscow with Oleg Taktarov, who's an MMA guy. Dumb enough to say yes, and then obviously when I showed up, you know, I had to put on the Soviet trunks, and he had the Russian boxing trunks, and it's like a Soviet against Russia. Yeah. So it was kind of cool. But you get in the stadium, there's 5,000 people in there, you know, cheering, and not. It was Russian. They didn't really quite understand that it wasn't really a real fight, even though it was kind of like 80% real. Yeah, well, you know, that's part of my life, and I love when it's can be part in the films too, you know.
We ended off by picking the brain of the former Ivan Drago, who provided his thoughts on the forthcoming bout between co-star Randy Couture and James Toney at UFC 118.
That's a good matchup, you know, that's the way they should do it, really. So hopefully the difference in styles will make it an interesting fight. I mean, I know Randy is a great grappler, and hopefully, you know, he'll probably try to take him down, but you never know. I mean, he looked very lean when I saw him last week. I didn't talk to him much about it, but I'm sure maybe it's because he's doing more sparring, because, you know, when you're doing more stand-up sparring, you get leaner. The speed kind of leans you out more, and I think that's what he's been doing. So, who knows? It's going to be an interesting fight for sure.
Catch Dolph Lundgren in The Expendables, which hits theaters August 13th.